Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, let's talk about our friends in Brazil for a minute, because in news that should surprise absolutely no one, President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil has the coronavirus. Even after testing positive, Bolsonaro is trying to downplay the disease. Right after his diagnosis, he walked up to a bunch of reporters, pulled his mask off, and said, "Just look at my face. I'm fine," which is in fact the medically approved way of determining whether or not you need a ventilator. 65,000 Brazilians have died from this disease. At least 1.6 million Brazilians have gotten it, but we'll probably never know the real number because the health ministry in Brazil stopped posting data back in June. A study by Brazilian researchers published also in June found that infections in Brazil's poorest neighborhoods could be 30 times higher than the official count. So there's probably a massive, just unseen group of people suffering. Bolsonaro has just, he's made it worse for several months. There's no other way to put it. He walked around in public without a mask. He criticized lockdowns, social distancing. He called it the little flu. But despite all these grim statistics, some Brazilian states are starting to reopen bars and gyms and restaurants. Sounds familiar. Brazil's response, it has nothing to do with Trump, but the parallels are obvious, right? I mean, Bolsonaro is worried about the economy tanking. He wants to win re-election. He's worried about getting impeached for corruption charges. And despite running a country with an advanced economy, with healthcare infrastructure, the response has been a disaster. I also just point out the guy's 65 years old. He's had some recent health problems. He got stabbed a couple of years ago, which is insane. So he's at considerable risk here. But he's basically decided that the political and economic hit is worse than the virus. Ben, do you think that Brazil is going for de facto herd immunity by letting this disease just rip through the country? Or is this terrible leadership? Is it both? Like, what is your read on why Bolsonaro would approach a pandemic this way?
Well, if you were going to design in a laboratory one of these right-wing populists who is the worst possible person to be in charge during COVID, it'd be a pretty tight race between Trump and Bolsonaro. I mean, I think if you look at his response, too, he's exhibited a lot of the traits that have been problematic everywhere. He downplayed the virus. He kind of mocked people who took it seriously as not being, manly enough. His self-conception as this tough guy, this strong man, led him to not want to wear masks and make fun of people who did that. He has, basically deconstructed pieces of the Brazilian state that he sees as leftist or socialist, the environmental protections in the Amazon. He's taken aim at the education system as being too liberal. And obviously the public health infrastructure is clearly not meeting the moment here. So if you needed a warning sign of where this brand of kind of anti-government, strongman, tough guy, kind of misogynist type leadership can lead, Bolsonaro is it. It's telling to me that the second world leader we've had with COVID that we know about, the first is Boris Johnson, another right-wing guy, nationalist. Boris Johnson used to make fun of people who shook hands. Then he almost died from COVID. It'll be interesting to see literally what happens to Bolsonaro's health because, as you say, he has some risk factors. Here's the thing that worries me, Tommy, and I think to broaden it for the world, the Americas is in much more dire shape than the rest of the world. And part of this is that the U.S. and Brazil, the two biggest countries in this hemisphere, have handled this probably as badly as any other major countries in the world. But you've also seen increases in Mexico where the left-wing government, the left-wing populace there has not particularly handled this well. You see vulnerable countries in Central America that don't have a lot of infrastructure. So one of the things that I worry about as we look out over the next 6 months is some real problems in the Americas that leads to obviously first and foremost loss of life, but also potentially kind of breakdown in different places, movement of peoples. This could be a really rocky time from, Sao Paulo all the way up through our northern border. The Canadians have handled it okay. And I think we should see this as yet another warning sign about, our own hemisphere needing to do better here.
Yeah, it's probably not long before we start hearing build the wall chants at Trudeau events. The thing that I'm finding just still enormously frustrating is that we still have a debate that's framed between this either or choice between addressing the economic concerns or dealing with the virus. It's like lock down and destroy the economy or open up and save it. And it's just not how this is played out in the US and states or internationally. Sweden is a great example of a government that basically just let everything stay open. And the result is a country that has 6 to 12 times more deaths than its neighbors, and that still expects the economy to contract at about 5% this year. I think it was 4.5%, which is comparable to Denmark, its neighbor. And what we're seeing is that the countries that have a good economic story lock down quickly and severely. Then they put in place testing and mitigation processes to ensure a safe reopening. But these half measures mean people are getting sick, people are dying, but at-risk populations are staying home, they're self-quarantining, they're reducing their spending, and the economy is getting hit anyway. I mean, this morning, Ben, I saw that if you want to travel to New York from 19 states out of 50, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I mean, the economic impact of a state-based policy like that is going to ripple through the U.S. economy. I guess my question for you is, like, do you have thoughts for how Biden or Democrats in Congress or people like us or the media can try to reframe this debate in a way that's accurate? Because right now it feels polarized and stupid and honestly not really reflective of where the country is, right? When 80% of the country wants people to wear masks and 20% don't, but those 20% get the news, like, I do think it skews the perception of what people want or the choices involved.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, how much the distorting effect of Trump, filters into other parts of the culture, right? Because the clearest indication to me is, okay, we've all talked about how South Korea got on top of this at the very beginning and never really took off. Their deaths in the low hundreds. But Europe, Western Europe in particular, was about where we were a few months ago. And they have significantly bent the curve, which has put them in a position to safely begin to reopen their economy and resume economic activity. And of course, one of the ultimate indicators of how much Trump has been winning is that Americans can't even travel to Europe now. I think if you look at what's happened in Europe, so places that couldn't stop the outbreak from reaching them, but then were able to get on top of it faster, it's not a mystery, right? It is people wearing masks, leadership modeling that behavior, people abiding by social distancing, and a very, very robust network of testing that can both allow people to kind of return to work and resume normal activity with confidence as to whether or not they have this, but also to allow for contact tracing if we can identify somebody who's sick, who they've been in contact with, and shut that down instead of shutting down the entire economy. There's not a lot of, mystery to this. But I think part of what happened here is we all knew that. And a couple months ago when these debates were happening, people are saying, where's the national testing regimen? Why aren't people wearing masks? Why isn't Trump modeling this behavior? And then a bunch of jackasses with AR-15s started going to state capitals, and suddenly we're covering that. And then, of course, you have George Floyd, and people are focused not only on that, but how Trump is responding to it. And it's amazing to me how much we as a country have kind of just lost the thread on what we need to be doing. And the basic message is we cannot open this economy safely, and we're going to be shutting things down again and again unless we do the things that we know have worked in other countries. Yeah. I think for Biden, what this means is when he gets elected, think about this, if he gets elected, knock on wood, it'll be a very contentious transition period where Trump will be actively kind of working against him, probably not cooperating with him. But Biden's going to have to be prepared to hit the ground running on January 21st. And that means rejoining the World Health Organization that Trump has left, joining the international response around, hopefully, the dissemination of a vaccine so that can be disseminated globally in a fair and equitable and not a costly way that benefits pharmaceutical companies but puts people front and center. But also, how are we going to resume the global economy? When is air travel going to resume? When are supply chains going to get back to normal? Because even if people are going to bars, I mean, I don't know why the whole debate about opening the economy became about bars and fucking restaurants.
Who cares?
What about global supply chains? What about travel? What about manufacturing having a capacity to have their supply chain in place so they can sell stuff or they can get the parts that they need? There's no evidence that this kind of work is being done. And I think the Biden people have to be prepared to hit a very uneven ground running on January 21st if they win.